Hi, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Whoops, there's the mic. Probably can hear me better now. Welcome to the Joe Chaffee Weather Show on this Thursday night, the 24th of October. It's 7:01 Eastern Time, and we are, I'm still having kind of a difficult time coming to grips with just exactly how everything is going to play out this weekend and also for next week. It's amazing how you've got models just kind of keying on different things and coming up with different solutions, and each one certainly has a plausible solution with regards to all of this. We're gonna take a look at what's happening and go from there. And I doubt we're going to come to any kind of clarity on this, but we might as well give it a try. And we had another beautiful day here in in my neck of the woods, eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England. Was just gorgeous with blue skies and sunshine all day, and that sunshine extended down into the mid-Atlantic states and extended up northeastward into central New England as well. Got a little bit of a change coming up tomorrow, so we're going to talk about that. Welcome to all of you on the board. Robert Brown, I did see that question. I'm sorry I didn't respond to it. My fault. High off the southeast coast of Greenland this morning. Is that going to create a blocking pattern, and that will affect next week's weather here on the East Coast? The question with regards to that is whether it's transitory or not, and the other question is just exactly we're going to take a look and see where this all happens, because you could have a blocking high up there, but that still might mean that the ridges and troughs across the United States are not exactly in the spots you might want to see them with regards to particular outcomes. So it's not always a guarantee, but I think the bigger question is whether, if something is up there, whether it's transitory and how is it impacting the East Coast with regards to getting a trough to form there as we go into next week. So we'll take a look at that, and we'll see what the models have to tell us. But in the meantime, let's get started tonight as we take a look at. I'm going to start off with the snow from last night because it was actually pretty substantial in Colorado, and I don't have the snow totals that occurred up into northern Texas because that really happened after the observation time. But this is as of 7 a.m. This morning. And the snowfalls in Denver got about 3 inches on the analysis here. And you can see the yellow bands of up to a foot of snow just to the west of Denver. And then running southward down near Colorado Springs, we have Colorado Springs itself is in that dot where it's got 3 inches, but up to 8 inches surrounding that area. Pueblo got 3, but to the south of there, we have a large area of 8 to 12. So it was a fairly substantial snowfall cutting down through central Colorado from north to south, and again, started to push into northeastern New Mexico early this morning as of 7 a.m. And I did notice that some of the obs in North Texas, where it was snowing today, yesterday it was in the 60s and 70s up in North Texas. So that's where they get these big temperature swings, and it could drive you crazy. So going forward with additional snowfall now over the next 72 hours, I'm just showing you the probability of 4 inches or more, and that's confined to an area in Wyoming and northern Colorado. So the blue, anything from blue on to the red and purple. So the blue starts off the 50% chance of at least 4. That I think is a reasonable probability to look at, 50-50 chance of at least 4. And you can use this tool, by the way, on the WPC site or the NCEP site, and you can go down to as little as an inch. So if we go to greater probability of greater than 1 inch, you see that there's pretty much a large area, 50% or more, covering all of Wyoming, northern Colorado, and into parts of Kansas and Nebraska, and also a 20% chance of at least an inch up in northeastern Minnesota, and then driving up into the northern Rockies. And there are all these different time frames that you can pick out. So I just kind of went right with the 72-hour time frame which would take us into Sunday. That's actually during the daytime Sunday, ending 8 p.m. Sunday evening. So at least for now, all the cold air seems to be in the west, and WPC, the Weather Prediction Center's rainfall here. Now, we're dealing with a non-tropical low that is developing in North Texas. And we're also dealing with, I think, a tropical low that's developing in the southwest Gulf that is going to be feeding a ton of tropical moisture northeastward. So we're looking at WPC's vision of 3, 4, 5 inch rainfall amounts all across Louisiana, Mississippi, through a good chunk of Alabama, western half of Tennessee, all the way on up into northeast Indiana and western Ohio. So, and even into southeastern Michigan. So they've got, this is a pretty substantial feed of tropical moisture that's getting pulled up northeast, regardless of whether we wind up seeing a tropical storm develop out of this or not. And in the northern mid-Atlantic onto southern New England, we're looking at rainfall amounts on the order of 1.5 inches to maybe some 2-inch amounts here going through the next 7 days. So that carries us right through, by the way, next Thursday evening. And amounts tail off as we head west into the Rockies. Although in some of the mountain areas, you're seeing liquid amounts of 1 inch to 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches. So most, if not all of that, is going to be in the form of snow. And then there's very little that goes on along the west coast except up into the Pacific Northwest. New England looking at anywhere from about 1 inch to maybe another round of 2 inches plus in parts of Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, and through much of upstate New York. Down the coast of the Carolinas, amounts are anywhere between 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches, but it does look like 2-inch plus amounts when you go into western South, western North Carolina, and northwestern Georgia. Then it tails off again as we head down into Florida. But again, the biggest takeaway for me is the fact that you've got this, this real strong feed of tropical moisture that extends all the way down deep into the tropics from this system covering in its evolution. Just basically, it looked like one big gyre spinning around over Mexico and Central America, and then you had a piece of it move into the Bay of Campeche, Southwest Gulf, and now we're watching to see whether that develops into something tropical. Here's a surface map tonight. That low at 18Z. See if we got the 21Z map up yet, and we do. So we do have the non-tropical low is actually pretty close to Dallas. Temperatures are in the 80s on the other side of it, going out to the Gulf Coast, and then jump into the cold air, and you're looking at temperatures in the low 30s across North Texas, and looks like, at least at observation time, there might have been some snow at Amarillo, and maybe even some light rain and snow mixed at Lubbock, and some snow at a few of the stations in northeastern New Mexico. So this is cold air that's on the other side of this front that came down the Rockies. And of course, you've got the warm tropical air with dew points up in the upper 60s and low 70s throughout much of southeast and south Texas. And then as we get down into the southwest Gulf, you can see that a low is analyzed there, but it's very broad. There's no, there's one sort of broad 08 isobar where they analyze a surface low. This is something the Hurricane Center pointed out, that there is a low pressure area that's developing there, but there's no, it's an elongated low, and it's not a very tight surface low that has developed in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico. So all of this, of course, is going to be feeding into the weather that we're going to be dealing with in the Northeast. But in the meantime, on the satellite loop tonight, you certainly can see the clear skies from, and not in northern Maine so much, because you're getting some clouds starting to roll in now. But through at least southern Maine, it was clear, and now clouds are rolling in because of a little bit of a frontal boundary up to the north. And then you've got this almost V-shaped area of clearing skies that is covering. Let me move this down so we can so I can work with this. But right through here, I mean, you've got this, almost a finger of dry air that's separating you've got this northern trough here that is swinging eastward. And then, of course, you've got this tropical feed that is coming up that's going to get involved in all this. It's going to be interesting to see if we do wind up seeing some kind of subtropical or hybrid low that comes out of this. This is not that different from what we saw with Nestor last week, and I was was looking closely. You certainly can see the clouds turning cyclonically in the Southwest Gulf. It's hard on this view to see whether there's any kind of tight low level circulation, but there definitely is some turning going on here. So we'll see what the Hurricane Center does with this. On their last update this afternoon, they rated this as a 60% chance of becoming a tropical depression for a short period of time, because ultimately this up here is going to wind up absorbing all of this. The question is if you could see a situation where the whole thing winds up getting hybridized, is where you get a low that comes out of the Gulf, and then moves northeastward toward Louisiana. Of course, we saw where WPC's got that channel of tropical moisture with all those big rains. But we could wind up seeing some sort of situation where the non-tropical low and the tropical low basically become one. And this time around, unlike what happened last week with Nestor, where the shortwave trough that was driving it northeastward eventually just passed over it. It merged with it, and then it just kept on going. It never really took the developed circulation and caused it to become a complete identity all its own as it moved its way up the eastern seaboard. Instead, we just saw this broad upper air feature that took over, and the surface low really wasn't all that important. I wonder whether it might be a bit different this time, or we could see a situation where this low that comes out of the Gulf becomes the main low as it moves northeastward and pulls all this tropical moisture that's down here and takes it up into the Ohio Valley, the Tennessee Valley, and then eventually up into the northern mid-Atlantic states and on up into New England. So it's going to certainly be interesting to see how this all plays out. In the meantime, you've got some drier, colder air that's moved down. You can follow that cloud. It almost the cloud line that comes down from Canada does look kind of strange. It almost looks like somebody's got an open hose and shooting water straight down north to south. But it just shows you what the flow is at the higher levels of the atmosphere. Here's what it looks like on the water vapor imagery in the upper air. And you definitely can see the southern shortwave very well defined here. There we go. So, here's your upper trough, and here's your southern shortwave that is moving east. And here is your tropical moisture that is shooting northward up toward Louisiana. And we also have an upper low, if you look out to the east of that, east of Florida, that is moving westward, that stands out fairly well on the water vapor imagery. The darker blue, that's all upper level dry air, just to give you perspective. But when you start to the green areas, that is where you have areas of fairly intense moisture. So we would want, if you're looking to see whether there's something tropical with this low that's down in the Southwest Gulf, you would look to see if you get sort of a ball of green that is sitting right over there, indicating some colder cloud tops, and we're not really seeing that at the moment. There are some colder cloud tops down here, but they're not clustered in a ball to give us an idea that we have a low-level center. On the radar, there's actually some rain that has moved up toward the Texas coast, not a whole lot of it, also touching parts of southeast Louisiana. So much of the Gulf low precip is offshore. But the radar is pretty busy across North Texas, where it's mostly snow, and then you've got rain through central and eastern Oklahoma into northwestern Arkansas and extending into southern Illinois and southern Indiana. Also looks like we have where there's that front with a low up west of Dallas. Looks like we have a front with some showers and thunderstorms there. Just want to I'm going to bring up SPC. yeah, I figured there might be at least a marginal risk. They do have a marginal risk of severe weather ahead of that frontal boundary. If we look back at the map from earlier, where'd it go? Oh, okay, here we go. So here's where it's analyzed at 5 p.m. So we're just ahead of that cold front now. That's where your marginal risk of severe weather is lining up. So SPC, uh, pretty much matching up to the surface map. So there it is on their forecast. And there you go back to where the surface map is. And again, it's where all your tropical air is. Meanwhile, by the way, moving up into the northeast, you see the weak frontal boundary in western New York, western PA. Not too much of a difference between the air on either side of this, but it is part of the process of setting the table for the system coming up from the south. And you see it here. If we follow that frontal boundary along, it's going to eventually just sort of stall out. That's probably where you're going to wind up seeing the bulk of your moisture go, right along that alleyway that is shaping up. It's only going to be able to get so far east when it's going to come to a stall, and then after that, we'll see what happens as far as rainfall for this weekend. It's going to be kind of tough to figure out how much of a warm front are we going to have. One of the things that we're going to see is high pressure building up in New England Friday night and Saturday. That's going to be setting up an onshore flow. That complicates matters with regards to Saturday because you could have dry air from the north come down and just sort of keep you in at least some early sunshine before clouds take over and keep most of the rain at bay. So let's take a look at the late afternoon GFS model and see what's happening. Before we do the surface, let's pull up. We'll get to Robert. I'll get to your question. So this way, I'll pull up the upper air. Now we do have, as you noted, we do have a building ridge that is running up roughly along 45, 50 degrees west, going up to Greenland. It's east of Newfoundland, and then it runs up northward from there. So I'll just outline it here. So this is what you're seeing here. Let me do a better job with that line. Hang on a second here. So there's your ridge that is building up toward Greenland. Let's watch and see what happens to it. So as we go through Friday and Saturday, you do have an upper high that forms there. But one of the things that I can see right off the bat, and this is where the upper high is. It's in eastern Greenland and closer to Iceland. So the problem with that is in that position, you wind up with a ridge that builds up along the East Coast, but in this particular case, the upper high is out off in the Atlantic, so it's not like you've got this super upper high building all the way up and you're dealing with a heat wave high in the southeast. This high is offshore. There's ridging that builds into southern Canada. There's the next trough is digging down out to the west into the northern plains on Sunday, and as we move along, what happens is that that upper high, is transient. It doesn't really push westward. You want to see it push westward in a way that it brings those heights down in the east. And it's not quite doing that, but you do have higher than normal pressures up here going into next week. So that at least is going to allow this next system to kind of try to swing in to the east as we move through Monday and Tuesday. At least that's what the GFS does. And the models are still kind of fighting this idea of whether it drops into the east or does the ridge drop more, does the trough drop more in the west first in the Rockies and slows things down with the arrival of cold air, if it ever even gets here at all. I think we are going to see some. This is, this is a pretty active looking upper air. And to get that colder air to come in, we're probably going to see some kind of storm development for the middle part of next week, be it a deepening wave on an approaching cold front or some kind of low maybe that comes out of the Gulf states and moves northeastward. It's hard to say exactly how it's going to happen, but the trough is forecast to swing to the east, and then you get another shortwave trough that drops down right around the weekend of the 4th, 5th, and 6th. So we could wind up seeing another event around that time. At least it would appear to be that way if you look at the models. And then after that, once that lifts out, you see the flow kind of flattens out a bit as we go into the middle part of November. Believe it or not, we're almost there. I mean, the long range takes us to November 9th. So not quite the middle part, but toward the end of the first 10-day period. So after we get through, say, November 4th, 5th, and 6th, after that, it looks like the pattern's going to flatten out a little bit. It's probably temporary. It's maybe waiting for the next reload, but that may be what carries us through the month, at least the first half of the month of November, after we deal with the volatility of this weekend and early next week. So let's take a look at where the GFS is taking us. Actually, before we even do that, let's just pull the European up. Well, I have it here. So the European has its own views of things, as it's been doing for days. Here is, of course, we've got our situation for this weekend. The upper low in Texas, a bit more vigorous than on the other models, kicks up to the Great Lakes. And then, again, the European keeps trying to drive this trough down in the west and dropping a cutoff low into Utah and then swinging it eastward. This is for Friday. I mean, this would suggest that at least through much of this week that it wouldn't get cold at all here in the eastern part of the United States, at least not significantly. And the GFS is different. It's continuing to say no. We're not going to see the trough drop into the southwest. It's just going to hold bodily drop into the Great Lakes and then swing into the northeast. Still not seeing. The thing is, you can look at what's going on in the scope of things, of what's actually happening right now. Looking at water vapor imagery and satellite loops and everything else. And I think you can certainly make a case either way, that it could drop in the west or that you could wind up seeing it more in the east. You can make valid arguments for either one, but it's hard for me to figure out which way this is going to go with next week. So let's try and at least figure out this weekend and take it from there. So we'll pull up the surface map, and for those of you, if I get this from time to time, some of you, some people have said, how come you always use the GFS? You don't really show the European very much. We're very limited in what we can show with regards to the European. We have 24-hour gaps. We have no precip maps that we're allowed to show. So the GFS is one, and the icon, and also the Canadian. We have a lot of different maps and a lot of different time frames that we can look at, that we don't have that advantage with the European, unfortunately. But here is the GFS for tonight, and we've got some snow. I'll put up the radar. And you know what? The whole country's going up here. Hang on. So there's your snow in North Texas and western Colorado. You see the snow, I'm sorry, the precip and the rain. Here is where your Gulf low is going to be coming from. Sorry about that. Hang on, fix this. Let's get the pen. So here's your, here's your Gulf precip, and now there's some kind of low down here. You've got your front with your surface low in Texas, the non-tropical low that is going to be moving on out to the east and then turning to the northeast. High pressure is going to eventually rebuild up in New England, but here we go. The Gulf low, the Texas low moves into northern Louisiana. The Gulf low kind of gets absorbed in all of this, and you got a surface low that by Saturday afternoon is sitting in southern Illinois. This is a far cry from what the model was showing just several days ago, which was basically a flat wave that was running northeastward and was going to pass off the Virginia coast and bring an area of rain into the mid-Atlantic and into the Northeast. And instead, we're dealing with a low that is going up west of the Appalachians and almost right along the Mississippi River towards Chicago, bringing some heavy precip up to Wisconsin and into Michigan and so on. So you can see how WPC has that solid area of that 3 to 5 inch rain band. It makes sense. Now here for the Northeast and northern mid-Atlantic, there's a warm front in here, and that's going to get pinned by the high to the north, and we've got a bit of an onshore flow because of that high. So does the warm front push all the way up, or does it struggle? That impacts precip amounts. It impacts temperatures. The GFS really kind of has this front struggling. And then, of course, the whole thing swings eastward on Sunday, and you've got a rather large area of rain and some heavy rains in parts of upstate New York and central PA that eventually move into New England and out east by the time we get to Sunday evening. So it does look like some pretty wet weather here, and maybe even a few thunderstorms down in Virginia, North Carolina, as the front pushes to the coast, and then it's gone. By Monday morning, we're seeing a low near Cape Cod, right there. There's most of the, virtually all the rain is now well out, and we're seeing some drier air that's coming in on the backside. By the way, while all this is going on, there's another trough dropping down through the Rockies, so you're seeing a little bit of snow here for Sunday night into early Monday, and then that gets sort of kicked away to the northeast with the next low. The GFS's idea here is to take a low from there and run it up a disturbance into the eastern lakes on Tuesday, and you get a little bit of development there. Southern end of the frontal boundary starts to get active here for Tuesday night into Wednesday. This, one of the things I've noticed in the last couple of days is that the GFS is saying, they're kind of pushing the time frame back with regards to first it was Monday night, Tuesday, trying to get a front through. Now it's more Wednesday with regards to taking longer for the whole trough to swing eastward. A low develops, goes out, and then it turns colder and drier toward the end of next week. We got another front coming through for Sunday night and Monday of the following week. But I got to tell you, I'm not 100% certain that that's how it's going to play. The European has a very interesting solution here for next week, in that hang on one second, folks. I'm just still trying to get used to all these different commands and keys here. So we're going to have to do it. We'll do it this way with the first with the upper air. So this is our Saturday system. Again, we can only see 24-hour increments. So your vigorous upper low in northeast Texas winds up going into Michigan. You have a ridge that is built in the east, right there. Whoops. Right there. Nope, that didn't do it. Let's try it one more time. Right there. You got a ridge there. This is your upper low. That dictates the Sunday system that runs up to the northeast, and now you've got your deep trough that is swinging down out into the plains and Rockies. The next one, and this is where again the model keeps trying to drop instead of swinging that whole trough eastward, which is what the GFS does. The Europeans building a ridge in the east for Monday, and this trough just drops down. You've got this cutoff low that drops down into Utah by Wednesday. You still have the ridge along the East Coast on Wednesday with this west-southwest flow. This is going to mean for something else coming out and probably running up toward the Great Lakes if the European has its way with that trough to the west. And that's exactly what it does. It takes out a vigorous upper low and surface low that goes with it that will run up northeastward to the Great Lakes. This would probably mean a substantial snowfall for some areas in the central Rockies, and then maybe eventually on up through parts of Iowa and Wisconsin and into the central and northern Great Lakes. If this winds up verifying, that goes through. We'll finally get a cold front through here sometime Thursday night or early Friday. So we'll get a shot of cold air behind it. Another trough tries to drop in behind it for next weekend. So you have to ask yourself whether there's going to be something else here that might develop along about Sunday and Monday, November 3rd, 4th, somewhere in there. So a lot of, definitely a lot of confusion in the upper air. Oh, excuse me, a whole lot of uncertainty going forward. I wanted to take a look, and we went last night and showed this. I want to take a look at Europe because we noticed yesterday some early snows for for Ireland, for the southern part of Ireland. and for parts of England and Scotland. And and much of and this was being caused by colder air that was coming down from Greenland and Iceland. So let's see if we're still seeing that scenario for tonight and Friday. And instead, now it's got a warmer look to it, so it's showing mostly rain instead of snow. It does have some colder air coming down from the north, but it looks like the model really kind of backed off what it was showing yesterday in terms of the amount of cold air that it was bringing down from Iceland and Greenland. And then as we move into next week, looks like we've got some kind of low in the northern Mediterranean around well north of Rome, out in the over the coastal waters that brings some snows up into northern Italy and into through the Alps, and then that low gets into the Adriatic. You've got a high that comes in off the Atlantic that brings some decent weather to England and Ireland early, not next week, but the following week, because now we're into November 4th and beyond. But it just was models were showing all this snow yesterday, and cold, and now it's just maybe just a handful of degrees warmer, so that most of the precip winds up being in the form of rain. Well, it's too early anyway. That's not that's no surprise that we would see something like that. So look, and again, not a whole lot of clarity with regards to our weather situation going forward. So hopefully we'll get maybe a better clue about things tomorrow. And of course, we're going to be watching to see what the tropics are doing. I am joining the chat board right now, so just give me 1 second here, folks. One man's opinion. Thank you so much for hitting super chat tonight. Really appreciate it greatly. That is actually probably 2 stogies for me. Or a stogie and a double espresso, and maybe even a couple of chocolate chip cookies. So thank you so much. Really do appreciate you hitting super chat. So Robert Brown, I hope I got the answer to your question. I hope I was able to nail it for you and clear things up. Well, our buddy Alfred Phillips is up in Wainwright, Alaska at 16 degrees Fahrenheit on the western Arctic coastal region of northern Alaska. He is way up, guys and gals. Look up on a map where Wainwright, Alaska is, and he's sitting right on the north coast. And by the way, one of the things I did notice yesterday, Alfred, I was looking at the sea ice, the growth of sea ice in the Arctic region. Actually, there were 2 very interesting things about it. One is that during the summer months, when it hit its low, it made a higher low when it was below the 15 or 20-year mean, but it was above the most recent all-time low as far as sea ice coverage is concerned. But since then, I mean, it looks like it was starting to grow, and then it just sort of stopped, and now it's even below that bottom year of sea ice. So there's something going on up there. The sea ice is just not expanding. Even if you were to just kind of look at where the ranges are as far as the most extreme and the fastest and the slowest sea ice growth rates, we're even underneath that. So that's a little that's disturbing in a way. You want to figure out what's behind that. Maybe there's part of a new cycle going on. Who knows? But we'll see if that winds up having any impact on the way the winter develops across North America. If there's less sea ice up in the Arctic region. Rosendo Benitez, I know this is a little early. Is there a chance for severe weather with a low pressure system this weekend? Are you talking about in the Northeast or in the Mid-Atlantic states? So if you just let me know where you're asking for. I don't. This time of year, severe weather up in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast is kind of a tough sell. I don't think SPC is not showing any severe weather forecast for Friday, although they'll probably wind up having to do a marginal risk for somebody in the Gulf states for Friday. They've got none for Saturday and none for Sunday. So, and none through the rest of the forecast period. Um, it's really tough this time of year. You got to have a really deep upper trough, or at least a trough that's deep enough where it's holding its own. And one of the things that's going on with this particular system is that the actual upper feature is vigorous now, but it's going to be weakening as it goes forward through Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So there'll be even less support for any kind of severe weather. Jason Barry, it was indeed a very nice day in New York today. Okay, so you're asking for the Mid-Atlantic region. I think there could be some thunderstorms scattered in the mix. I don't think they'll be severe, at least from what I can see. Um, William Uber, it looks like the Gulf will be open for business for the winter. Well, I'll tell you something. This is what the third Gulf low we've seen. Certainly, well, Nestor, and then this one. And I want to say that we did have one before that in the last month or so. Maybe this might be a year where the Gulf of Mexico is a bit more important um, in producing weather systems. It's been a while. The winters have been seeing their storms. There was a whole stretch that I could remember back in the 70s and 80s, and even into the 90s, where we saw lows come out of the Gulf of Mexico on a fairly regular basis, and then somewhere I don't know, maybe when we got into the 2000s, it sort of changed. We didn't really see that many Gulf systems come out in the wintertime to come up the eastern seaboard. So if it's one of these things that runs in cyclical fashion, maybe, just maybe, it's time for the Gulf lows to start opening up. Charlie Baker, my painting is getting very good on the maps. Yeah, if Michelangelo got his start this way, no. The man was a sculptor. Did not like to paint. And I forgot the name of the movie. Charlton Heston plays Michelangelo, and oh my God, I just went blank. He was in My Fair Lady. Rex Harrison. Rex Harrison plays Pope Julius, who apparently was his patron, but was notoriously cheap and was too busy fighting wars all over the place. In those days, that's what popes did, apparently. They were cheap and they fought wars. Bobby Livingsworth, the Gulf will be open for business. There is going to be a very large snowstorm in early December for the Mid-Atlantic, Ohio Valley. It almost looks like if it wasn't for the H, if I looked at it real quick, I thought it said Onion Valley, Ohio Valley, and part of the Northeast. You know what, Bobby? Let's get there first and see what happens. I do think that we're going to probably see. I don't think November is going to be anything overly special. There'll be a few storms along the way to deal with, but I don't think there'll be anything in there that'll knock your socks off. But maybe that'll lead to an active December. I don't know. I really don't have a good feel for what's going on when it comes to the long range, and I've said that many times. I certainly am not, good enough to pinpoint a time frame in a certain part of the month for something to happen. I don't know. I did talk to my buddy Bill Goodman with the Weather Service, and he is actually quite good at noting time frames in the long range, and he was looking at sometime toward the end of November, perhaps as a time frame to watch for something to set up. Well, Scott Brewer, thank you so much for hitting Super Chat tonight. I really appreciate it. And it's good to hear, by the way, that your mom is doing quite well and and recovering quite nicely. So send her my best, and I'm sure the best of everybody that is on the board. The chairman is back. He had a few days off taking care of his mom, but he's on the board tonight, and it's always good to see him there. So good to hear about your mom. The agony and the ecstasy. Yes, thank you, Kathleen Trudy. I appreciate it. Yeah, that's the title of the movie. They usually you don't see it. It's on Turner Classic Movies whenever it's Oscar month and the whatever it was that was whatever technical awards that it won. But Charlton Heston played that was a pretty tough part to play. Michelangelo was not he was incredibly talented, but the way he played him, he had his demons. He also had his standards. He didn't want to paint. He wanted to sculpt. And yes, he did the Sistine Chapel, David Schwartz. I was there back in 1987, I think it was. I think it was 87 that I was back in Italy and went to the Sistine Chapel, Rome. Everybody should do Italy at least once in their lifetime. It is just absolutely, it's a beautiful country, and the history, the art, the churches, the architecture, it's just terrific. They've been running news clips on YouTube about Bill Huber about the blizzard of '78. But it's all about the Boston area. Why are they running clips right now about the blizzard of '78? Remember the storm like it was yesterday. I know Long Island got hit very hard. Yeah, I lived in the Bronx at the time. It was kind of interesting because that's one of those storms where the heavy snows kind of banded up. So if you were on either side of the bands, you got maybe a little bit less. And it happened that where I was kind of in between one of those heavy bands. But if you were in those heavy bands, you wound up with 2 and 3 feet or more, and even higher amounts as you went east out on Long Island. And certainly in southeastern New England and Rhode Island, where they had 40 and 50 inch amounts from that, that was incredible for them. Those storms are generational events. When they happen, you think they're going to happen every year, and they just don't. So, you had a lot of time winds up going by in between, say, the blizzard of '96, for example. Well, in terms of what the blizzard of '96 looked like and how it played out, which was widespread from the mid-Atlantic states on up through much of New England and through upstate New York. We've had other snowstorms along the way, but each one kind of has its own character. If the Gulf of Mexico becomes a player again this winter, that's when we could wind up seeing something like the '96 storm. But there are other ways. Doesn't have to always come out that way. Mark Gladfelter going to Erie, Pennsylvania. So you want some lake effect snow? Hey, if you finally get this whole trough to move out and move into the east and bring in that cold air, maybe you might see some lake effect snow showers in Erie, PA. I drove by Erie, PA a couple of years ago. I didn't actually go into the town, and I did it in the summer months. In the early fall months. I did not do it in the wintertime, but it is on my list of places to go and things to do, and that is to go up to the Great Lakes and do a lake effect snow event at one point. Let me, by the way, since I got everybody here, before you go, those of you in New Jersey, okay, guess what? We have a library appearance coming up, and relatively soon. It's going to be on November 20th at the Bayonne Library, and I don't have a time yet for it. I'm guessing 7 o'clock, but let me double check on that. But that's on Wednesday, November 20th. So I will be there for a good solid 90-minute talk, and we'll talk about the winter, the upcoming hurricane season, current weather. We'll take whatever questions you have. So put that on your calendars, and I will clarify the time on this. But I just cinched it up today. So library talk coming up in New Jersey, the Bayonne Library in Bayonne, New Jersey, on Wednesday, November the 20th. And then I do have one on Long Island in February, in early February at the Sachem Library. I want to say February 4th, but I'm not sure. I have to double check. I have to get waiting to get a finalization on that one. All right, so mark it down. Thanks for being here tonight. Really appreciate it greatly. Hope everyone had a great day today. And setting up for Friday, the end of the week. We'll have weather in 5 tomorrow in the morning, so be sure to tune in for that. We'll have our website post throughout the day, and of course, we'll go for a live stream tomorrow night. No, Tim, Rayo, I'm off to the next 5 days, so I'm not at FiOS One News. So I won't see Joe until next Tuesday. But when I go back next Tuesday, we'll be sure to do, assuming that he should be finally feeling okay, because he's had this terrible head cold and it's been impacting his voice. But assuming that he's all 100%, we'll do a Joe and Joe weather show next Tuesday night. So mark that down on your on your calendar as well. Okay, so weather in 5 tomorrow morning. Website post through the day. We'll have the YouTube live stream tomorrow night. Make sure you download the free weather apps, the Meteorologist Joe Chaffee app on Google Play or on the App Store for iPhones, and the Angry Weatherman, that's Angry Ben's weather app, that's for Android devices on Google Play, also for free. And we will see you tomorrow. Good night, everybody.